Genuine question here. Do Liverpool have a contract problem, or do they have a contract strategy that they are following? And I want to just address some, or it's not down to me to address, but just unlock and unpackage some of this idea around the contract situation going on at Liverpool and why it has gotten to this stage. Why some people may be annoyed at the ownership at the very top level of FSG and some of the interim characters that have been in the meantime. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Virgil van Dijk, Salah, even now talk of Luis Diaz getting a brand new deal is interesting because as a fan base, we want to know that our long-term interests, or at least what feel like our long-term interests, are secured. We love some of these players, we've developed relationships with them, they have great chance, they have great affirmation built around them at this point. And frankly, we don't want to see them go to a rival because it feels like a win for an opposition fan base. And that, I think, is very important to acknowledge at this point. We cannot say that everything at Liverpool must be understood through the lens of business. We're not Chelsea. We are not a club who just go, oh, this is an investment for us. What we do have to understand is there are two levels to this. First of all, FSG, who own Liverpool, and then Liverpool, who are Liverpool. Then there are these kind of interim characters or characters that go between those two models. Michael Edwards, Hughes, slots kind of closer down to the Liverpool level, but probably also answers obviously to those people above him. In the meantime, we've had people like Julian Ward, Jorge Schmacht, I think was his name in the meantime, and then a couple of other interim people who manage day-to-day ongoings at Liverpool. And you know, it's interesting to look at all those characters, but also how since the last time Edwards left Liverpool, we've not really seen continuity in terms of contract extensions or even contract renewal. Trent had a lot of little re-ups as we go. A couple of players have had re-ups. A couple of people have been allowed to leave on freeze, the likes of Emre Can, the likes of Gini Wijnaldum. And I kind of wanted to assess a little bit of that because these are high-profile players. Gini Wijnaldum, Emre Can are not the same profile as a Virgil van Dijk, a Mo Salah, or a Trent Alexander-Arnold within the team. Arguably, they're even below a Luis Diaz level of contract. But arguably, I think when Emre Can left, there wasn't all that much upheaval. But when Wijnaldum left, that was possibly down to a tactical difference and change within the team, possibly also down to some observations that the medical staff and maybe Jurgen Klopp himself have made. Not that these people have got any sort of inexorable dips, but just that Liverpool have run their time with them. Now, obviously the smart thing is to try to get as much value in the market as you can for those players, and maybe you will get that. But at the same time, if you've got a player who's sitting there on a big contract and you've signed him to that purely to get transfer value, then I don't know how motivated the player would be just to sign a new contract. Bear in mind that a player, ideally, for him, if he leaves the club, gets as big a signing on bonus at the other place that he goes to, rather than Liverpool receiving a majority of that money. Now, if you sell Saudi, a ridiculous country like that, and I mean ridiculous in terms of the money that they have, not in terms of the regime behind it, then, of course, you might get a little bonus on both sides, for the club, but also for the player. Hence why there were discussions around Mo Salah possibly leaving for 150 million last summer? Yeah, it was the end of last summer, right? And that looked enticing to some people. I think everyone, including me, was discussing the idea 150 million, if you reinvest that into this squad, you possibly get 3 players in the Salah mould as opposed to the one in Mo Salah. But things extended, Mo Salah stayed at the club, and here we are with a fantastic unicorn of a player that is Mo Salah. And yes, he is a unicorn of a player, but at the same time, would have been interesting to see what Liverpool would do with 150 million, right? Though, again, easy not to spend my money. It's not my money. We can do whatever we want in that case. Of course, on the other side of this is that Edwards and everyone else, they operate in unconventional ways. They operate in ways that I'd imagine a lot of us on a day-to-day basis probably can't really understand. These are fairly high-powered, driven, niche, probably like highly intelligent individuals who are maybe high-functioning in a sense, able to run a club at a very complex level and plan years in advance. And what is interesting is, if you look at the way that Chelsea's run, look at the way that Arsenal are run, look at the way that City are run. Obviously, Chelsea are very different to everyone else. Chelsea have signed contracts onto players that are just going to be there for years and years and years and years and years. That is seemingly a business model and a strategy. Liverpool are not that. Neither are City and neither are Arsenal, actually. All 3 of those teams had players on very similar length contracts, but City seem to be dedicated to a few more older players, maybe showing that they value knowledge and tactical flexibility, and maybe better the devil you know, than just signing a lot of young guys. Turnover within the team has maybe not been as quick as we would like it. I think, obviously, signing Ilkay Gundogan back shows an element of, yeah, sure, they want people who've got knowledge, but I also think it shows their midfield turnover is not being as quick as they would have liked it. The likes of Paquetá, the likes of Bellingham, who were meant to be coming to the club, haven't actually come. And for some of the reason we don't talk that much about it, because it doesn't play out all that publicly, and maybe actually there aren't as many clicks in the fan base to be able to even talk about it in the first place. Liverpool, closer to that. But equally, are Liverpool really in a financial situation to offer older players who may have a horrific dip towards the end of their career just sentimental value of contracts, paying those guys out essentially? And at the same time, does it make sense for them to do so? Obviously, it would be great if as publicly and as celebratorily as possible, we can renew these players and make us all feel good, reinvigorating some of the fan base, and also obviously giving us some great marketing, giving us, again, I think probably a bit of a, hey, come land here at Liverpool, and there is a real benefit to being at the club. Players remember how players are treated. Players observe how players are treated. Agents observe how players are treated. Not only do players speak within their own social circles, but agents also have multiple different clients represented at multiple different clubs. There's not just one agent with one person, though I know that is now a lot more common. There are people who are going to lunch all the time. There are people who are sharing knowledge. There are people who are saying, hey, if you go to this club, you're going to be able to get your client another 10% when they sign on. If you go to Juve, it's much better here. If you go to Barca, it's much better here. Hence why players have still been going to Barcelona, even in some of the most unfinancially sure times, if unprecedented financially unsure times we've ever seen. All of that to say, Liverpool have had a long time now where arguably we could put a bit of blame at the doorstep of FSG. And I want to explain why, because I think just random blame and just saying FSG deserve blame or, asking about money, we're not really able to answer these questions. It's much easier to make a clicky kind of headline saying, obviously the comment below everyone's YouTube at the moment is like, where's the money, John? Like, we get it. There's clearly money. But with that, it doesn't actually answer the question. It just sort of galvanizes a fan base against an ownership who really, let's be honest, we sort of want to succeed. So, that's what I find weird. Anyway, the point being, FSG have had a hard time in succession and finding good succession to Michael Edwards after that. They've now found, surprise, surprise, Michael Edwards. But before, it seemed like there was more of a power wrangle between the team that were on like a more of a Jurgen Klopp side of things. Not that it was not that it at all came across badly, but people more on that side where it was like, right, I want to be able to manage this because I want the profile of player that I want. It didn't actually go all that badly for the club. We've got Gravenberch, we've got Szoboszlai, we've got McAllister, all those kind of guys in that time, probably attracted from the prospect of working with Klopp. And then there was the other side of things where it was like, okay, what is it here that Michael Edwards would do? How would we build the club differently? And arguably, you might have seen some high-level departures because it seems as if there is a price for everyone in a Michael Edwards system. Offset contract, offset fee, offset all these kind of things. Is there a profile which fits that within the market? Is there not only a footballing profile, but also a personality profile within the market? For instance, like when Liverpool had Ryan Gravenberch, and last season, we relatively saw very little from him because Klopp wasn't playing him in a position which extolled his best virtues as a player. And the other side of it, where it was like, well, Salah and the great output of those players, they're not being asked quite to compromise as much. Now there are a couple of people who maybe compromise. Andy Robertson at the moment is compromising within the team. McAllister is compromising within the team to empower other people around him. Maybe as fans we don't see the benefit of that as much, but I'd imagine that the club and the coaching staff see that. They want good personalities, they want people who are going to win for the team. They do not want individuals, this is very clear at Liverpool, who are going to disrupt what it is that Liverpool as a collective are trying to achieve. They want people who buy into the collective. A huge part of that, of course, is that if you want to play as part of a collective, you also have to be individually motivated. It cannot just be, well, I suppose it could be, but it very rarely in a high-profile footballer's life, not because they're selfish people, but because they have a short clock to work with here. There's a very short career for a footballer. You could break your leg tomorrow. You could play for 10 years. Ivan Toney's just gone to Saudi Arabia on allegedly post-tax close to £1 million a week. Not that I know much about his finances, but anything over a certain amount of money, and that guy is just making generational wealth for his family. He wants to bank as much as he can at a later stage in his career than he would have been able to at, say, even 1 or 2 lower league levels. And that's kind of the point here. Players want to make money. They don't want to just, they don't want to just play for a club and become a legend. That's a big part of it. If you can do both, and I think a lot of these guys, Liverpool, the profile of player that Liverpool will be looking at, the type of person they'll be looking at, will want to do both. They'll want to leave a meaningful footballing mark on football, and they'll want to leave with the requisite amount of cash that they deserve for helping Liverpool, for helping the fan base, and for helping an institution that is able to pay them so much money. That puts Liverpool in a difficult situation. They are now, what most people would say, perceived as weak later on, because successive footballing directors, you could argue possibly under Jurgen Klopp as well, have allowed some of these contracts to just run down and down and down, possibly deliberately in some agents and some players' instances. We don't know. We don't know what Mo Salah and his agent were thinking. Those guys will, and I think this is one thing we have to separate FSG and the club here. We don't know what Mo Salah's not thinking, hey, I'm negotiating with Liverpool. He's thinking of the people he's directly opposite on the table, or his agent is, Rami Abbas. And they're thinking, well, we're negotiating with FSG here. These guys have X amount of money, they have X amount of high-profile players. We've seen them let a player such as Mookie Betts go to the LA Dodgers over staying at the Boston Red Sox. We know how these guys negotiate. Now, that in itself, a lot of people talk just about finance, and I get it. People want to just talk numbers because that's all we know. If I read an article, that's probably one of the only pieces of factual information that I can actually get out of it. I can get a lot of speculation from a journalist. I can get a lot of people saying, oh, well, we think Mo Salah wants to do this. Here's my theory as to why Mo Salah said this and forced the club's hand, or whatever it is. I think the reality is, if Mo Salah knows that it's his last season and maybe he's made that decision in tandem with the club, maybe he's trying to manage the image of him leaving the club without it looking so damaging to his reputation, but also that Liverpool don't want him as a player, or FSG, or whatever the structure is, don't want him as a player. I think this is the thing, is at the moment these are all being glooped into one mass negotiation. And actually, Virgil van Dijk's situation is different to a homegrown, 20-something-year-old Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's a generational talent in the level of a Steven Gerrard. Probably, Gerrard was all time, but yeah, Trent is too. And then also Mo Salah over here. And then there's people like Luis Diaz, who, I've not even spoken about Luis Diaz's contract situation. He's been sitting on basically roughly the same wage since he signed for Liverpool. He's one of the lowest paid high-profile stars, possibly in the Premier League at this point. And the guy is putting out intense numbers under Arne Slot. So there's also that we wonder why maybe over the summer he was looking at a move to Barcelona. Well, guess what? You'd be promised a lot more money if you go somewhere like Barcelona. And at the same time, then Arne Slot comes in and kind of mixes things up a little bit. I think a lot of people will have been thinking, right, if Jurgen's here for X amount more years, I'm going to know that, Jurgen will probably want to sign me onto a new contract because he's sentimental with the players or all these kind of things. When Jurgen then out of the blue says, I'm leaving, a lot of those players go, oh, who's going to be the next guy who's sentimental, who comes in and is dedicated to me in the way that I've been dedicated to Jurgen for 7, 6, however many years the players have been at the club. And also, people like Diaz were people who a lot of people were discussing last summer as not surplus to requirements, but, up there with, do we really need this guy right now? Is this the guy? Or could we upgrade in that position? I think a couple of, I was kind of having that discussion, if we signed Anthony Gordon, would that be an upgrade? Would that be a sideways move? Would that mean we could get some cash in and sign Anthony Gordon? How would that work? Could we secure our long-term future? But it seems as if Diaz is now very much a structure and a fixture that we want at Liverpool because Arne Slot is getting the best out of him and he seemingly plays very well in that position. Whether that continues well into the season, by the way, when other teams work out how to cut out some of our pressing or work out how to isolate some of our wingers or cut off Jota and the Diaz rotation, I'll be interested to see. Very often narratives change very quickly because football changes very quickly itself. But the other factor that we're completely leaving out here is, I think a lot of people are seeing Liverpool players and seeing Arne Slot at Liverpool and going, those players look happy. Now, obviously, he's in a honeymoon period. Obviously, we're still very much in a period where the football is fresh, the tactics are fresh. Beating Manchester United is very difficult different to trying to beat Arsenal or Man City or any of these high-profile players and clubs that we see ourselves competing with. Those are two different, that's apples and slightly rotten apples. My point being, we're still in a honeymoon period of tactics where actually Liverpool's players and the hangover, but the positive hangover from the Klopp period is hardworking, motivated, brilliant characters who've been motivated for years and bonded as a group. Amazing. That's very difficult to find that kind of continuity in football in the first place, but that's what Arne Slot has walked into. He's then managed to remove or at least dial down some of the emotional nature of the way that this team play and dial up some of the tactical, maybe slightly more removed elements, which are now seemingly making Liverpool make some better decisions. When they come under real pressure, we'll assess then. But the point is, there is also now an interesting project for any player that wants to come in a Zubimendi or whoever it is. I think seeing that Zubimendi interview is very sweet, actually. I quite like that idea. I just think there are going to be players looking at that and going, yeah, I could be part of that. I would actually quite like to be involved in an Arne Slot thing at Liverpool. We'll get paid relatively well. I'll be at a very high-profile club. I'll be in the Champions League, at least for this season. I'll be playing under a manager who, in a midfield, is going to, rotate me with Szoboszlai, McAllister, Gravenberch. There's seemingly not really that much depth of backup for those guys, so I'll come in there. That front six is very strong. The back line, I'd imagine there are wing backs at the left side and centre backs on the left side, thinking, well, I could play understudy to Virgil van Dijk, and I could then play left back or whatever. There's a lot of seeming pathways into the first team. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Yes, I think Liverpool have let this lapse a little bit too long. At the same time, I think there may be strategy behind this, or at least now they have to go with a strategy that's going to make this work. Some of that may be to offer someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold a very lucrative contract, but it may also be to wipe some, and this sounds crazy to say, wipe some wages from the books and see where they're at after that. See who they can sign, see what kind of financial outlay it would take in order to replace Mo Salah in the team, or at least in the aggregate. Appreciate you guys checking in. I will be back here later, probably tomorrow. No games to preview this weekend. If you've not already hit the subscribe button, please hit it down there. If you've not already hit the Discord, go take a look at that as well. And I'll chat to you guys in a little while. Much love. Bye.